The eviction notice was duct taped to my front door like it was some kind of cruel prank. I stood there in my work boots, still covered in drywall dust, staring at the bold red letters like they were written in another language. Notice of non-compliance. You have 10 days to vacate the property. HOA board approval attached. I tore it down and stormed inside, heart pounding. My wife, Danica, was serving her third deployment in the Middle East. She was a staff sergeant and the strongest person I knew. Our daughter, Bella, was upstairs working on a school project. And me. I was just trying to keep the house standing until Danica came home. And now the HOA wanted us gone. The president, of course, was Karen. And yes, her name was actually Karen Blakemore. Mid-50s, pearl necklace, the kind of woman who treated the HOA bylaws like they were the Constitution. She lived 3 doors down and had been gunning for us since the week we moved in. I tried to stay civil. I really did. But when I marched down to the HOA office next to the clubhouse, she was already waiting for me like she knew I'd come. "Jonathan," she said, without even looking up from her laptop. "We've warned you multiple times about the vehicle in your driveway, the flag on your porch, and the unapproved modifications to the shed." "My wife's deployment flag," I asked. "The one issued by the Army." "That's what you're calling non-compliant," Karen crossed her arms. "This community has standards. You've been warned. The board voted. Danica's been gone 6 months fighting for this country. You think now's the time to pull this stunt?" She didn't blink. "You have 10 days. I left before I said something that would get me arrested, but I wasn't backing down, not this time. That night, I pulled out every document I had. Property deed, HOA bylaws, Danica's military orders. I even installed a new security camera on the front porch. I wasn't just going to fight this, I was going to bury it. The next morning, Bella handed me a note she found slipped under the door. A new complaint. Unauthorized structure, trampoline in backyard. She was 11. That trampoline was her birthday gift from Danica before deployment. I looked out the window and saw Karen standing at the end of her driveway, arms folded, watching. That was it. I called Danica's commander, explained everything. I wasn't trying to get anyone in trouble, I just needed help understanding where the line was, what rights we had. The next thing I knew, I had a lawyer from the Military Legal Assistance Office calling me back and asking for details. I gave him everything. Photos, letters, copies of the notices. Even the security footage, which showed Karen trespassing onto our porch at night to slap the red sticker on our door. "Send that to me," he said. All of it. 3 days later, Bella and I were having breakfast when I heard the unmistakable sound of boots, dozens of them marching in sync down our street. I stepped onto the porch and froze. Danica's unit, full uniform, several of them. They walked right up to Karen's house. One of them knocked once, then held up a packet of documents. Karen peeked out the blinds, then opened the door 2 inches. "Mrs. Blakemore," the staff sergeant said calmly, "you are being served with a cease and desist on behalf of Staff Sergeant Danica Fairchild and her legal representation." Karen's mouth dropped open like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. And he continued, "You'll be turning over all HOA documentation for review, effective immediately." Bella stood next to me, wide-eyed. "Dad, is this real?" I nodded. "Yeah, baby, it's real." A day after Danica's unit served Karen with the cease and desist, the entire neighborhood was on edge. Not because of us, but because something had shifted. The HOA office blinds were shut tight. The usual passive-aggressive emails about lawn length and mailbox paint had stopped cold. You could feel it like the air before a thunderstorm. The next morning, I found a manila envelope stuffed into our mailbox. Inside was a letter from a civilian attorney, not ours. It was from the HOA's legal representative, a guy named Curtis D. Langston, who apparently specialized in community compliance litigation. The letter demanded that I immediately remove all unapproved modifications, vehicles, and structures, including our shed and the storage rack in the side yard, where I kept extra plywood and tools. It ended with a threat to pursue further legal remedies, including property liens. I drove straight to the county records office. The clerk behind the desk was an older gentleman named Harold, who wore a bolo tie and had the kind of patience that only comes from dealing with 1,000 people more irate than me. I handed him the letter. Can they do this? He took a slow sip from his coffee mug before answering. Not without board minutes approving these decisions, and not if the HOA isn't properly registered with the county. Let me pull some filings. 10 minutes later, Harold clicked his mouse a few more times, then turned the screen toward me. See this. The HOA filed an amendment to their bylaws last year, but it was never notarized, and their nonprofit status has been administratively dissolved since February. My breath hitched. So they're not even legally functioning, Harold nodded once. Not in the eyes of the state. Which means they don't have enforcement power, not until they fix this. I walked out of there feeling like I'd cracked some secret code, but I wasn't done. That evening, I returned home and pulled up our security footage from the last month. I hadn't reviewed everything, just the clip of Karen taping the eviction notice. But now I was looking closer. And there it was, 3 separate nights, around 2 in the morning, headlights swept across our garage. A dark SUV parked across the street, engine idling. A figure got out, walked across our yard, always the same path, and paused near our shed. I enhanced the video and froze the frame. It wasn't Karen. It was a man. Tall, stocky, wearing a hoodie with a reflective vest. He wasn't delivering anything. He was taking pictures of our electrical box. The side gate, even the gas line. I forwarded the footage to the military attorney who'd been helping us. Within 2 hours, he got back to me with a name, Thomas Penwell. A private contractor often hired by HOAs to document violations. Except one problem, Penwell had lost his license in Arizona for falsifying inspection reports. The lawyer said, "That man shouldn't be anywhere near your property. Contact the police." Now, I called the non-emergency number and gave them everything. By the time the officers arrived, Bella was upstairs on a video chat with her mom, and I was reviewing footage with the sergeant on duty. He watched the clip twice. "This guy's been doing recon. That's not standard HOA enforcement. That's borderline criminal trespass, maybe worse." He took the footage with him, said he'd be in touch after they ran Penwell's name through their system. By the next afternoon, an officer returned with a Detective Lisa Monroe from the Property Crimes Division. She didn't waste time. "We executed a search warrant on Penwell's laptop this morning," she said. "We found photos of 15 different houses in this neighborhood, close-ups of locks, breaker boxes, even fence latches. He kept notes, including yours, marked with the word soft access." I stared at her, stunned. She continued, "We also found emails between him and someone using the address President at Willowridge Hoanet. The messages discuss preparing violations to force turnover of non-compliant parcels." "Turnover?" I asked. "Like forcing people to sell?" "Worse," she said. "There's wording that implies intentional targeting of owners unlikely to fight back. Mostly deployed military families, retirees, or those behind on dues." My stomach turned. Danica's name was in one of those emails. So was mine. "Our property was labeled as ideal for acquisition." I asked, "What are you doing about it?" Monroe didn't blink. "We've opened a criminal investigation into the HOA board for conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful surveillance, and potential racketeering." I nodded slowly. "So what do you need from me?" She handed me a subpoena. "Everything you've got." I gave them everything, every letter, every video, every copied email from the HOA portal. Then I went a step further and knocked on every door within 5 houses of ours in both directions. Out of the 18 homes, 11 had received similar threats. 4 had moved out in the last year under pressure. One elderly couple said their garage was vandalized days before they received a fine for hazardous storage. Another woman, a single mom who worked nights, said someone had been leaving notices on her windshield about after-hours disturbances. We formed a group chat that night. Within 2 days, we had a petition drafted, signed, and delivered to the mayor's office. While the police built their case, we were building ours. City Councilwoman Elaine Park agreed to meet with me and 2 other residents. We showed her the documents, the footage, and the police report acknowledging the investigation into the HOA. She leaned back in her chair and said, "This is systemic. You've got yourself a corrupt board trying to pressure residents into forfeiting homes. We've seen this before. But rarely this organized." I asked her what came next. "We'll file for emergency oversight," she said. "If approved, the city can temporarily suspend the HOA's authority while the investigation plays out. But you'll need a majority vote from the homeowners to dissolve or restructure the board permanently." We got it in 4 days. Karen tried to stop it, of course. She called an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse, printed flyers that said we were destabilizing the community and undermining property values. She even tried to cancel the vote by claiming we hadn't given enough notice. But the city had already posted a public notice on the community website. The meeting was legal. The vote was binding, and when the day came, it wasn't even close. Out of 68 eligible homeowners, 51 voted to dissolve the current board. When the ballots were counted, the room went silent. Karen stood near the back, arms to her sides, as Detective Monroe gently handed her a court order stating that she was no longer authorized to act on behalf of the HOA. Then came the arrest, not just Penwell, not just Karen, but also the treasurer, the vice president, and the secretary, all charged with conspiracy, fraud, and illegal surveillance. They had been colluding to drive out vulnerable homeowners and flip properties to a real estate investment group. Danica's name appeared in the investor prospectus they found on Karen's hard drive. Our house had been listed under Phase 2 acquisition. They never even saw us coming. The day after the arrests, a group of neighbors showed up at our door with coffee, muffins, and a banner made of cardboard that said, "Welcome home, Danica." I hung it on the porch, the same porch they tried to use as the first domino to knock us out. Turns out they forgot one thing. We don't break easy, and we don't back down. The first city council meeting after the vote was standing room only. Folding chairs filled the back of the chamber, and people lined the walls, whispering and watching. A local news crew had set up near the front with a camera pointed straight at the speaker podium. I recognized at least half the people-seated residents of Willow Ridge who, up until a few weeks ago, barely waved at each other. Now they were passing around legal pads and scribbling questions like a jury preparing a verdict. I sat in the third row, between Mr. Alvarez from 2 houses down and a nurse named Camille who just returned from a shift. She'd brought a folder full of photos showing how HOA board members had entered her backyard without permission and cited her for debris while she was at work. The debris: a plastic kiddie pool and 2 folding chairs. Councilwoman Park called the meeting to order. "We're here to review the emergency oversight request for the Willow Ridge Community Association. Per the municipal code, the council will hear testimony from affected residents and law enforcement before determining whether to extend the suspension or recommend full dissolution." Detective Monroe, in a blazer this time, stepped up to the microphone. "Over the last 2 weeks, we've executed 3 warrants and seized digital evidence indicating that former board members of the HOA intentionally targeted residents through fabricated violations, unauthorized surveillance, and coordinated harassment. The goal was to pressure families into abandoning properties for below-market purchase." Gasps rolled through the room. Monroe continued without raising her voice. "What we uncovered is consistent with a pattern we've seen in other fraudulent HOA cases, except here. There is evidence of collaboration with a private holding company registered in Nevada under a shell corporation. The board president, Karen Blakemore, received direct electronic transfers totaling over $85,000 over a 12-month period. Someone behind me whispered, "They were selling us out." Monroe turned another page. "We've also discovered that the board's treasurer used HOA dues to pay for services unrelated to community maintenance. These include luxury car rentals, personal travel, and over $10,000 in charges to a private security contractor not licensed in this state." Camille stood up. "That's the guy who was in my backyard. He took pictures of my kid's sandbox." The councilwoman raised a hand. "You'll have a chance to speak. Please hold all comments until we open the floor." Monroe stepped down. Councilwoman Park gestured toward the crowd. "If there are residents who wish to submit impact statements, now is the time." One by one, neighbors walked up to the microphone. A retired postal worker described how his mailbox had been ripped off twice, then cited as damaged property. A young couple said they received fines for excessive shade coverage because their tree exceeded a height limit that wasn't in any official document. A widower said his wife's garden had been bulldozed by a landscaper hired by the board without notice or consent. I waited until near the end. When I stepped up, the room quieted. My name is Jonathan Fairchild. My wife, Danica, is a staff sergeant serving overseas. While she was deployed, we received an eviction notice taped to our door by someone who didn't have the legal authority to issue it. We were accused of violations that don't exist. Our home was labeled a target property in a document found on a former board member's hard drive. I paused. They didn't just try to evict us, they tried to disappear us, and if they hadn't been caught, they would have moved on to the next house, and the next. The council voted unanimously to extend the suspension. A formal motion to dissolve the HOA entirely would be scheduled for the following month. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed. A young journalist shoved a microphone toward me. "Mr. Fairchild, what would you say to other homeowners dealing with abusive HOAs? Document everything," I said. "Start with a camera, then find your neighbors." "You're stronger than you think." That night, Bella watched from the porch as a city crew arrived with a ladder and began removing the Willow Ridge HOA office sign. They unscrewed the letters one by one and loaded them into the back of a pickup. She looked up at me. "Does this mean it's over?" I knelt beside her. "Not yet, but we're close." The next morning, a plain white envelope arrived in our mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of names residents, mostly elderly, each marked with a dollar figure and a date. At the bottom, Phase 3 probate acceleration. I called Detective Monroe immediately. She drove over within the hour and I handed her the list. She read through it silently, her expression darkening. "This confirms what we suspected," she said. "They weren't just targeting active homeowners. They were planning to file nuisance claims against estates after deaths force families to sell fast, then flip the property. It's elder exploitation." I asked what could be done. "We'll be contacting every family on this list," she said, "and we're forwarding this to the district attorney. These aren't just civil violations anymore. These are felonies." By the end of the week, 2 more former board members were indicted. One was caught trying to withdraw money from an HOA fund that should have been frozen. The other had purchased 3 homes in the neighborhood under a different name with the intent to resell them at a profit through the holding company. Meanwhile, the city appointed a temporary administrator to handle community matters. She was a former housing rights attorney named Brenda Kwong, and she didn't waste time. In her first meeting with residents, she said, "I'm not here to police flower beds or dictate mailbox colors. I'm here to make sure your homes are yours and that no one ever tries to take them from you again." She opened the floor for suggestions. The first motion: ban any future HOA from forming without a supermajority vote and oversight from the city. The second: convert the old HOA office into a community center free to use for educational workshops, neighborhood gatherings, or tutoring. Both motions passed with applause. A week after that, Danica came home. Bella ran across the terminal at the base before I even parked the truck. I waited by the hood, watching my wife drop her gear and catch our daughter mid-sprint. They held onto each other for a long time. When Danica reached me, she raised an eyebrow. "So, I heard things got interesting while I was gone," I laughed. "You could say that." She looked around. "Where's the HOA president? Under house arrest," she blinked. "Seriously?" She tried to sell half the neighborhood to a shell company. Didn't work out. Danica looked impressed. "I leave you alone for one deployment." Later that night, we sat on the porch, watching Bella bounce on her trampoline. The same one they tried to cite as a violation. The air smelled like fresh grass, and for once, nobody was lurking at the end of the street with a clipboard. Danica leaned back in her chair. "You held the line," I nodded. "We all did." She glanced down the street at the empty lot where the HOA sign used to be. "Next time someone tries to mess with this community, they're gonna think twice." "They'll think a lot more than twice," I said. "Because now they know we fight back." The first thing Brenda Kwong did after taking her temporary position as administrator was request access to the HOA's internal server backups. Until then, much of what we had uncovered was surface-level emails, surveillance footage, and financial statements. Enough to prove wrongdoing, yes. But Brenda wanted the full picture. She brought in a digital forensics team, two quiet, efficient techs who set up shop in the now-defunct HOA office with laptops, portable drives, and a printer that groaned like a dying animal every time it spat out a document. 2 days later, they found the folder. It was buried deep encrypted, mislabeled, and hidden in a directory labeled Meeting Archives. Inside were scanned contracts, notarized letters, and a spreadsheet titled Accelerated Vacancy Schedule. Brenda brought the documents to my house herself, a grim look on her face as she unfolded the printouts across our kitchen table. They were staging incidents, she said. Falsifying violations was just part of it. They were calling in anonymous complaints to animal control, requesting wellness checks through social services, even submitting forged maintenance reports to the fire department. Danica leaned over the table, her jaw tight. They were manufacturing emergencies, Brenda nodded. In order to trigger code violations that would allow the board to initiate emergency board action. It gave them leverage to claim that a property was unsafe or uninhabitable. Once that was on record, they could start the process of pressuring the homeowner to accept a quick buyout or face daily fines. I stared at the spreadsheet. It had names, dates, and next to each an acronym. EBA, Emergency Board Authority. They were using public systems to shake people out of their homes, I said. That's not just corruption, that's organized abuse. We're already coordinating with the district attorney, Brenda said. But there's more. She slid over a copy of a notarized document dated nearly 2 years prior. It was a power of attorney form signed by a resident named Richard Grayson. I recognized the name. He'd passed away last summer, an elderly Navy veteran who used to sit on his porch every evening with his dog. The HOA had claimed he'd left the property to the association in lieu of unpaid dues. They sold it to a private buyer within 30 days. Grayson was diagnosed with early-stage dementia, Brenda said. This signature, it's been matched against earlier documents. It doesn't line up. And the notary listed was disbarred 6 months before this was supposedly signed. Danica ran her hand down the page. How many of these do you think they pulled? We've confirmed 5, possibly more. Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office filed additional charges: elder fraud, forgery, and illegal transfer of property ownership. A special investigator was assigned to the case, and subpoenas were issued for the bank accounts of every former board member. One of those board members, a man named Russell Green, tried to flee the state. He didn't make it past Oklahoma. The highway patrol picked him up after his license plate triggered an alert tied to the investigation. He had over $30,000 in cashier's checks on him, all tied to properties sold through the same Nevada shell corporation. Back at home, the neighborhood started to breathe again. The community center, once the HOA office, had been repainted by volunteers. The old security cameras that used to monitor residents were taken down and replaced with lights and motion sensors for safety. Camille organized a weekend tutoring program for kids. Mr. Alvarez started a tool exchange board on the wall by the entrance. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were building something. But the story wasn't over yet. One morning, about a week after the new charges were filed, Brenda called me and asked if I could come down to her office. When I arrived, she was seated at her desk with a thick binder in front of her and a man in a dark suit standing off to the side. "This is U.S. Attorney Michael Yates," she said. "He's been reviewing the scope of the crimes committed by the former HOA board. He wants to talk to you directly." Yates didn't waste time. "Mr. Fairchild, your documentation and community outreach were instrumental in uncovering a criminal enterprise that spans multiple counties and at least 3 states. The shell company used to buy out properties here has been linked to similar operations in Arizona and Nevada, all using fraudulent HOA boards to acquire residential properties at artificially deflated prices. Danica had joined me by then. "You're saying this wasn't just local, it started here," Yates said. "But it's far bigger. We're preparing federal charges including wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and racketeering. We'll be seeking restitution for every homeowner affected." He handed me a letter. "The Department of Justice is formally recognizing the Willow Ridge community as a named victim in a large-scale fraud case. You'll receive funds to assist with repair, legal fees, and community rebuilding. Every affected household will be eligible." I opened the letter and read the first line. It was real, not just a moral win, an official, legal one. That weekend, we held a community gathering. Not a meeting, not a protest, just neighbors coming together to reclaim the space that had been used to control and isolate them. We grilled burgers. Kids rode bikes without being yelled at for riding too close to the curb. Someone brought a speaker and played music. Danica stood with me near the center, her arm around my waist, while Bella ran around with two other girls from the neighborhood. Brenda stood up on the small stage someone had built out of old pallets and said, "You don't need fear to keep a neighborhood safe. You need people who care about each other." No one clapped, they just nodded, because we knew she was right. As the sun set, I walked over to the edge of the lot where the old HOA sign had stood. In its place was a new wooden plaque, hand-carved and mounted to a stone base. It read, "Willow Ridge, a community, not a corporation." Underneath it, smaller letters had been added in honor of those who stood their ground. I rested my hand on the wood, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips. Danica joined me a moment later. "You think they'll ever try something like this again?" "Not here," I said. "Not after this," she tilted her head. "What about everywhere else?" I looked back at the families, the music, the laughter. "Then we tell them, we tell everyone, what happened here, how we fought. How we won." She smiled, "Not the kind you give for a camera, but the kind that says you believe in something again." "Good," she said. "Because I've got friends in other bases. They've been dealing with similar HOA nonsense. I think it's time they heard this story." I nodded. "Let's make sure they do." That night, as the last of the grills cooled and the sky turned ink black, a light breeze carried the sound of kids laughing and music drifting through the trees. No more threats, no more notices, just neighbors finally free, and the house no one thought we'd keep. It stood exactly where it belonged,